So ads was really not something I had never been in that industry or that type of business before. So what I found out and what was really fun is I'd never been in that kind of high scale environment where, because of the reach Unity had, we counted 2.77 billion MAU. Yeah. So the challenge was exciting, the scale was high, and the technology was very, very interesting. So, as a technical leader, that was a thrill. And I really loved building that team.
Would love to move the conversation to KID. It's one of the most exciting companies. All just raised a massive Series A in this economy, which goes to show the strength of the product.
When I was given an opportunity to join, it fulfilled my desire to go out and have an impact on the world.
But you think about it, like all the engagement tricks and retention tricks, those are all somewhat predatory if you think you design them to go for children.
Hello everyone to another episode of Game Makers Lounge. Today we have Jeff Collins with us, who has an amazing history at the gaming industry. He was the ex-GM of Unity Game Services, a product that many love and use today. He also is an advisor to us at Snapser, which we'll obviously talk about. And recently he is the CCO of KID, which is a hot startup in the space. And we're going to cover a bunch of topics today. But Jeff, welcome. Thank you for spending time with us. Why don't you start off by giving a quick introduction?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. Well, my career started a long, long time ago in another millennium. And so it's been a rich and varied career. I got into gaming only about 6.5 years ago at Unity. And I joined as the VP of engineering for Unity Ads. And so that ended up being a pretty large organization. I think in 2021, we were 640, something like that. And that was all engineering. In fact, my whole career has been engineering. And I took a moment to figure out what I wanted to do. And I actually took an opportunity to become a business person. I went to the dark side.
Just like me.
I became
I see AJ.
Just like both of you. And I took the opportunity to go to the dark side to try out a general management role for the first time in my career. And that was because within ads, we were seeing a lot of adoption of just game backend, game as a service type functionality. And Unity had done a lot of acquisitions. And so I kind of, with a couple of other folks, Felix Tay and Ingrid Listillo, we decided to really assemble those into a offer that Unity could really rely on as part of its cloud offer for years to come. And then I was kind of selected as the person to lead that. And so I brought that to market in 2022. And then it was live in GA and still ticking away today. If anything, it's getting closer to the Unity engine, which was one of the things that we really needed to do to make it successful. And so they're doing a nice job of that now. In 2023, it was time, after 6.5 years, to do something new. As people may not know, I was working with you all and on advising your company, Snapser, and then I ultimately took a full-time role as Chief Customer Officer, which is yet another switch for me, in KID. And so a lot of what that has been entailing is trying to build that business from scratch. KID is a tool for helping games be compliant with regulations globally. And so a lot of this initial phase of the company is having me not do as much customer stuff as much as sales. And so I've been doing a bunch of sales work and working with different really large studios. We're blessed to be able to have access to those people in large studios. And so that's my role at this point.
That is super cool. Jeff, if I may double click on the very interesting change, I want to talk about two topics. One is obviously moving from ads to hardcore like game backends. What kind of a mental shift was that? Because I'm pretty sure ads as a business was not only, games obviously have ads, but there are also non-games that have ads. So you were now leaving that world and entering game making. That's one. But the second, which is very interesting, is not every engineer, you're still an engineer at heart. Now we got to know you over 3 months. You got in the code, you started coding. How was that mental shift to move to business? Was that something you wanted to try, or people forced their hand on you? Do you have any advice for people wanting to do that in the future? So sorry, let's start with the first and then move on to that.
Yeah, I get that second question a lot from other engineers. So let's start with the first. So ads was really not something I had never been in that industry or that type of business before. And one of the things that attracted me to Unity's use of ads was that ads often has kind of like a negative connotation with it, and a lot of people will have objections to that form of monetization. But there was really this cool moral high ground that Unity had, because the ad network we ultimately purchased before I got to Unity was almost like a cross-seller discovery mechanism. It was just a community of games advertising other games to each other. In fact, it was primarily focused on casual and hyper-casual and mobile. And so you would almost think of it as like a community recycling of users type function, less than it was kind of like, erectile dysfunction ads or God knows what, with political worse. I mean, there was moments where we were thinking of doing brand ads where political ads might have been involved, and we did not do it. So I was particularly attracted to that, and the fact that the monetization aspect was helping Unity build itself as a business for the long term. The revenue of the ads business was the dominant source of revenue, still is, if you look at the balance sheet and the public reporting on Unity. So I was very attracted to something that would help the company be successful. And I had been in fintech before. This was maybe adjacent. And so, the what I found out and what was really fun is I'd never been in that kind of high scale environment where, because of the reach Unity had, we counted 2.77 billion MAU. Yeah. That was our MAU, honestly. And so that was the time, as 2021 was the height. And to be able to be technical and associated in leadership with something like that, in terms of the implementation, the reliability that had to go with that, the machine learning. We actually had some pretty cutting edge stuff that was built in TensorFlow to do the inference, to figure out what the right campaign to show was. We had a huge data problem where we had to keep really, really interesting, disparate data services live and running all the time. And every time you had even a small little blip in the service, it was tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of missed revenue. So the challenge was exciting, the scale was high, and the technology was very, very interesting. So as a technical leader, that was a thrill, and I really loved building that team. We had an engaged team, we had a great mission-driven team. They wanted to help game makers make money for themselves, help the small studios be able to sustain themselves with ads.
I find ads so fascinating in that, for example, just the other day I was reading Reddit, and I can't remember what the topic was, but it devolved into players of games talking about why do they even bother advertising? It does not work. I just ignore it. Everyone's like, I just ignore ads. It doesn't impact me. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Of course, I'm reading this going, oh, it works. Like, people spend on this because it works.
Yeah.
And the perception and the reality are so divergent. And then I started wondering, would I rather just get random ads or targeted ads? I'm not even sure, because targeted ads feel a little too targeted at times. But then they're meaningful. But, so it's such a weird thing, ads.
Well, all Unity ever knew was how long you played a game and what other games you played. And we didn't have, and we consciously never took demographic information or profile information other than the fact of what your gameplay habits were. So we could tell that you were a proficient game player or a certain genre game player, but that's it. So targeting for us was that was where the moral high ground come in, because contemporary with that were some other people who are targeting you with much worse data, very nefarious purposes. And so we were pretty pure, and the people, the audience that you were really serving there was mobile gamers that wanted something fresh, and their primary method of discovery was some of these ads.
It was always a huge part of the budget in the games we made. So the only reason they're part of the budget is because it moves the needle. So there's no question, it works.
Yep, and it allowed Unity to have a financial resource that could allow it to innovate in other areas, including the engine. So it was a really important time for Unity.
Yeah, totally. And before you answer the next question, though, I mean, you cannot have an ads conversation without talking about IDFA. I mean, that came along. What kind of a change was that? Was that something expected? Was that a massive impact? Obviously, you can't reveal the details, but from your vantage point.
No, yeah. So I'll just tell you kind of in generalities that the rumors had been out that Apple was going to do something for years because they had released SKAd Network into beta and no one knew why. Like what was that for? So that preceded the announcement by at least like when I got there in 2017. So everybody knew Apple was going to do something. So the rumor was all around. And when you have a third-party ad ecosystem like ours, the ability to build a profile across games actually allowed us to have that profile of session usage and gameplay. And so when IDFA was going to be removed, it changed the dynamic of the business. It doesn't mean user acquisition goes away. It doesn't mean it tanks. It doesn't mean it blows up or anything like that. But it did stop because it reduced the efficiency of acquiring users. Because when typically we'd do it before IDFA, you'd say, well, I want this proportion of high spenders and I want this proportion of non-spenders. You can't do that when IDFA is gone. You can't do that when the profile isn't there to tie to across games. So the manner in which you advertise became slightly different, and it doesn't mean that it's a unnecessary business. In fact, if you see, AppLovin has actually been fine. They've actually grown their business with being able to deliver on a IDFA-less world, and it didn't affect Android in the same way. So there was still a market for non-iPhone. But it did have a profound effect on Unity, and then through a variety of sort of decision-making processes, ironSource was brought in as part of Unity. And now I think what Unity has is two powerful ad networks. So they just have to show that they can work together and then produce a larger multiplied output than just a sum of two parts. And if they can do that, I think Unity can be successful.
They have to unify.
And I'm always curious, though.
Yeah, you got to.
So one question, as a humongous org that you were running, right? I mean, 600 people. When such a shock comes in, I know you all had some idea, but it's different knowing something's going to happen versus it actually happening. How do you react? Is it like you then imbibe the startup culture within to come up with a smaller team to figure out the impact, come up with something tangible to do? Because the biggest drawback that big companies have is they move so slowly, but in this case, all absolutely had to move quicker.
There's a lot of lessons that I learned from being part of such large organizations. So a lot of the leadership of ads was a very fast-moving group. In fact, Ingrid Listillo is my mentor. So Ingrid Listillo taught me not only what it means to be urgent and move fast, but also what it means to be a great business leader and a general manager. I learned from watching her, and she was on it. And so we definitely responded with pretty strong urgency. We were creating new divisions. We actually reorganized because of the challenge of this IDFA removal, and we were able to move pretty fast. Moving fast, though, is a gamble, and it was an assessment that we made, the best possible assessment. Did it mean that we moved really fast as a result of those teams being reorganized and then put into the different groups? Well, I think sometimes that was successful, sometimes it wasn't. Like in some ways, we were faster when we were in the previous more monolithic organization than when we actually split it all up. And then since then, I think Felix has done a nice job of he corrected some of that. And I think there's a good, strong willingness and some energy there to take it forward. And so I think Felix Tay has got that right now. And some of the corrections that have been made on the organization side are going to make them even faster.
Very, very cool. Well, now the segue to game services. So obviously things happening in ads. You decided to be a GM. How was that like?
Well, so it was really great to get the opportunity. You don't just walk into a general manager job. You don't get offered you had to create your own company to get a CEO offer. No one came to you and said, "Hey AJ, you want to be a CEO?" Like, it just doesn't happen like that. And so, especially coming out from engineering side, what was true at the time, the climate of Unity was in the run up with all that growth and revenue and hyper scaling of the company. We had done a ton of acquisitions, all of them having a rationale around market positioning and trying to bolster ourselves for the future, especially since everyone knew that ads had a certain degree of risk associated with it, and ads didn't have the best multiples going into 2019 and 2020. If you were a straight ads organization, even an ad tech organization, you were not getting the same multiples as a SaaS business, which it was a comparison of like sometimes 5x to 20x in SaaS. So ads was great in that it was generating profit. It was incredibly profitable, but it was not exactly clear that was a long-term growth engine for the company. So we had acquired several businesses, several nascent businesses, much like ads was in 2014. We had acquired the sole voice provider for Fortnite, which was Vivox, about 100 customers at the time. We had acquired a company that was doing game server hosting and was directionally still near zero revenue at the time, but they had just launched with a game that was soon to be known to the world in 2018. It was called Apex Legends. And so, I'll tell that story separately, but we had acquired those two things in 18 and 19. And then in 2020, Unity realized that there was a market that was developing even for higher end studios to outsource your central tech layer to a vendor. And we see this as you and I and CJD were working on this with Snapster. We know that there are people that want premium game services, and Unity's role has always been, let's make game making easy, even down to the long tail of indies. So Unity had some game services, but never an organized effort to put them all in one place. The different buyers, the different customers of the various services that have been bought were fragmented. So we had to pull in almost two new centerpieces. So we had to pull in game backend called Chili Connect, and then a analytics, the last sort of independent analytics platform other than game analytics, was called Delta DNA. And so those formed the center of a new layer we called UGS. And then we pinned on Vivox and Multiplay on that. So that was all heavy lifting. And in fact, it took a lot of engineering work to do. Would I have done it the same way again? There was a lot of investment to put those things together, but we did it. And at the time, it didn't have a separate business leader. It was still under Ingrid. When IDFA hit, it was important to separate them because IDFA had urgency. So like the IDFA issue was going to be a challenge to the ad business. So we wanted to make the ad business go and be its own thing. And so what was left was this building of a new offer called UGS, and it didn't have a leader. And so it was in this moment that I volunteered to step out of my engineering leadership role and actually lead this thing and take it to fruition. And that suggestion for me to do that was accepted. And so I took a risk, which was, I always tell new managers in engineering, in this moment, you're the worst manager in the company because you just started and you accepted the offer to be a manager. What are you going to do about it? And so in that moment, I was the worst general manager in the company, maybe in the world. And I would have to do something about it to be a good leader for this business and learn how to grow it. And so that was the challenge that was really exciting to me. So I took.
Very, very cool. Do you think any of, so what kind of a shock was it when you became a GM? Were there blind spots? You were like, yeah, you know what, this I never even had to think about. I know I have a few, for as a first time business owner, would love to hear about that culture change from, just engineering things where
Yeah.
you run something, the code works, you feel that instant gratification. That's not the case elsewhere, is it?
It's not the case. I would say that like most who transition from one role to another, there's a lot of psychological safety in doing what you're good
Yeah.
at. And so I would say at first it was probably, looking back, did I really give up on my engineering leadership chops? Maybe not as fast as I should have. And so I was definitely involved in things as I transitioned into this role that were probably engineering centric and probably didn't help.
Yeah.
So, the biggest effort you have to go through when you change roles like that is you got to be willing to give up on some of that stuff, even though it makes you feel comfortable when you do it. So shock to the system was immediately I was going to have to take over. We didn't actually have a sales VP. We had a sales director. And so I nominally was the boss of sales. Now, if you go from engineering to suddenly being a sales leader, that's not in my resume. Like I looked at my resume and there's nothing in here that would actually qualify me for any of this. And then what happened was Unity this was, especially in 2022, as we started really trying to, work out what was going to happen with the revenue and IDFA and stuff, Unity began to really examine where it was at. And I got a P&L for my group given to me. And it was an official split P&L because we didn't do that before. It used to be that our profit and loss was across major divisions and we didn't all have them separated. So I got mine separated out and it was a little bit of bad news for me. And so when you confront that your vendor costs may be a little high and personnel costs, you have to like begin to learn, well, okay, so how are decisions made about such things and what am I accountable for? Because it's certainly not the code. Ultimately I was accountable for the code because I had an engineering division, but I was certainly much more accountable for, is this a business that Unity wants to run? And that's a bit of a slap in the face. Like that's a punch in the face because now you have to say, okay, well, what can I really know here that I don't know? And so how do I learn and how do you have an impact that's positive on any of these things as you begin? And so I obviously knew something. It's not like I went so cold that I don't know what I'm looking at. But you can see that you have to take responsibility for something like that. And that's not a trivial matter.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned, the role that some of your mentors played at Unity. Did they really help? And why I'm raising this topic now, it's a good segue into, our relationship where you're an advisor. And I think a lot of learnings there, your background there was really important to us because, you have those battle war stories and we wanted to, pick your brain. So, talk to us about the importance of these advisors you had and how do you look at the role of an advisor to a startup today?
Well, I would tell you that John was a mentor. So John John was my hiring manager. So John Riccatello was a mentor and I got to watch him operate for all 6.5 years I was there. And then Ingrid was my product management partner in 2017. She became our GM of the business where I had 600 people in engineering alone. So she had 1,200 people, I think, in her organization at one point and was commanding, a lot of revenue. And so just being able to, so she grew because she actually took on the general manager role. She was a product leader, took on a general manager role in 2018. And just being able to sit on her team and get coaching from her, and because she had a very strong business background from product management that I did not have, being able to see the way that she thought about the world. And she was really awesome at urgency and be able to move fast when it was time to move fast. And she teaches, she has a never say die mentality, and was someone who was going to try everything possible before you say it can't be done. And when we were trying to negotiate our way out of IDFA with certain large companies, she was in never say die mode. And I really would tell you, and I've said this live inside Unity when we were doing Ingrid's Going Away party. I said to the crowd that was there, it's like, she taught me about how to be a business leader. You never say die, and you go until the end, and then you keep adjusting and you keep going lateral. Yeah. And so I would say philosophically, I kind of modeled my ideas of how to do my job from her.
That is very cool. Yeah. And then, as we mentioned during the call, after Jeff decided to quit Unity, we decided to bring him on board as an advisor. He's helped us tremendously. But now let's move on to, you very overtly decided, leaving a big organization, you want to join a startup. Was that coming from a place of, hey, listen, I have this experience, I have this wealth of knowledge, I want to now really help a company at the ground floor and take it to the next level? I mean, you could have walked it into any big company as well. So why a startup?
Well, so I loved my role at Unity. In fact, I've loved all my roles in the various companies, but Unity was particularly good, and it got to scale. And so I wanted to try different scales of leadership. And at Unity, when it got up to that large organization size, one of the things that I really put heavy emphasis on, if you ask some of the engineers that were there, they'll tell you, is I wanted them to have a good experience. And I was all about the organization and people's ability to grow within it and build their own careers. Loved that stuff. A lot of people used to accuse me of wanting to be in HR. I was all about career ladders and all the kind of things that come with it, the value proposition for why to be there as an engineer, why to stay. So I was super into all that stuff. And that made, when we did one of the engagement surveys one year, and our group my group got an 80 on an engagement survey from, and we used one of the name brand surveys. 80 that's really great. And it was never celebrated because you don't want to compare numbers with people in the company. And it was just me and the HR leader that I was with. And we sat down one day and said, we think the people well served. We think that people are excited to be in this organization. That's the people, and I knew almost all of them. So I felt like I had really given something back to people that were in that part of the organization, and taught them things that they could then do to take my job in the future. And at that point, I realized, do I need to lead a 20,000 person organization? No. Was I missing something? Did I not achieve that kind of great experience for the people that worked in the organization that I led? No, like I had done that, and it was large, and it was high scale, and there were certain techniques I loved doing. And I realized that was kind of a mission accomplished. So then I wanted to say, okay, well, could I bring some of those learnings in the whole philosophy behind the system I was using to lead engineering and ultimately the general manager role, and offer that to a smaller company? And at first, I'm still in the rotation to do a CEO gig. I might actually end up starting my own company one day and things like that. But I consciously went to the startups. In fact, I went to several different venture capital firms and started asking around. So what are some companies that could use some help? I knew about Snapster from before, and then I got introduced to you because of one particular partner at A16Z knew you well and introduced us. And then I also, before you guys, got introduced to my current employer. So this was all in a sequence of asking the VC community, where could I help the most? So my mentality was, I didn't need to go for the scale. I accomplished a lot there, but I could offer something to a smaller company to give them maybe a chance to skip over some periods of painful learning, because I've been there and done a few of these things before. So that led me to you all and led me to KID. And in those contexts, I'm using some of that knowledge to
That
help.
is very cool. Would love to move the conversation to KID. It's one of the most exciting companies. I just raised a massive Series A in this economy, which
Yeah.
goes to show the strength of the product. Let's talk KID. What got excited? What got you excited about the product? Where are you folks headed?
Okay, well, so when I left Unity, I really was looking for potentially going to a mission driven role where my first impression was to save the world. So I was going to go into climate tech as a
Hmm.
CEO of some kind, and I actually went to some of the VC community out there and looked at that. But the first company and the first individual I met on any of my asking around was in fact Kieran.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, when I talked to A16Z, they were like, "Oh yeah, there's this company that's actually trying to solve the kids problem in games." And I was kind of focused on the other sector, some of the climate tech stuff, which I really think is cool. But all of a sudden I started thinking to myself, I was like, well, that's a problem we're solving because I have
Yeah.
kids. They're 26 and 23, they're grown now. And I would say that their experience with social media and gaming, they loved social media and games, but I have two daughters. They don't use social media as much anymore. They're both pretty disillusioned with the experience they had. They were harmed in many ways by some of the social media because they were in what I call the first wave of social
Yep.
media and gaming, which was the Wild West. So when I thought about my own personal experience and what it's probably like out there for today's teens, even worse, I thought about, well, wow, that's a way to have an impact like right now. This company has some resources to go attack the problem. And it's so important right now to go fix that because we know that there are problems in this industry with gaming in particular and social media where without more controls on it, I don't think kids are well
Yep.
served. And I think it is causing some issues. I think it is at the root cause of a bunch of um, things ranging from anxiety to just really kind of bad high school experiences for kids. And so I looked at this and I said, wow, however I can get into that company, that's probably this one of the stronger mission driven things that I can even see on the horizon right
Yep.
now. And when I was given an opportunity to join, it fulfilled my desire to go out and have an impact on the world and to help people. And then to do that from the vantage point of a company that is also exciting because it's in growth mode. So, going in, I've actually had to come much, much closer. Like we had legal counsel with Unity Ads and with UGS. We were talking about some of these regulations like copyright back at Unity, but I didn't know a lot about it. Now I know a lot
Yep.
more. And the biggest single thing that I found is that every game studio on earth is watching how many regulatory fines are coming out because this isn't just the mission driven side. This is more the mercenary side. The regulation is being put in place to stop the harm and the enforcement is fines.
Yep.
And when you look at the judgments that have happened in the last 2 years, it's more than the last 20 years combined. And I think it's like $2 billion. And that's the teeth.
Yep.
And so every game studio and frankly, every social media organization out there is trying to figure out, what do I do? There are some answers, but the industry is changing super fast. And I'm here in the middle of KID right now. Since May, the attitudes have changed completely and the market's even changed again about what's important. The most important thing is how can we protect our kids if the kids can lie about their age?
Yep.
Single most important issue in protecting kids in gaming. So lying about age, and then if they are truthful about the age, then tailoring content appropriately.
Yep.
But I think that first thing is the big rock. And when I'm inside KID right now, providing tools that are privacy safe and benign and well accepted to try to reduce the lying about age. Number one problem to try to solve.
Yeah.
That is super, super cool.
Obviously, from AJ and I's standpoint, we've made games, and so we know what it's like to have to solve that problem. And for sure, and obviously, we're not going to name specific games, but the general consensus is you do just what you need to do to comply. No more. No more. And your compliance officer, if there is one, that's the one you need to comply with, and that's it. And you're done. And certainly age lying is the easiest one. Like in all our games, it's literally just a drop down. Like, were you born this year or earlier?
Yeah.
And then, but you think about it, like all the engagement tricks and retention tricks, those are all somewhat predatory if you think you've designed them to go for children, because they're the most susceptible to these dopamine hits and returning to get loot boxes and all this stuff. So it's like, they all seem very benign when you talk about adults, but when you talk about children, they have a lot different light amongst them. So I think it's pretty rad that there's companies like KID out there that are like, that's their focus. You just engage with them. You don't think about all the compliance anymore. You just comply through KID and you're good. And you're a better studio.
Yeah, underneath the product, what's amazing about, it was founded by people from the legal profession. Underneath KID is a global database of all the different age limits for different functionality, including some of the loot box stuff, but also text chat, private DMs, AI curated UGC, avatars. All those things are governed by some regulation somewhere. Our API actually exposes all that, and it lets you create a tailored game experience that if we can get kids into the right age category, we can prevent a lot of that stuff from being exposed to those kids. And it's still the same game, still the same code base. It's not like you prohibited an audience. It's your game, but it's tailored so we're actually removing.
And in fact, you might have increased your audience by doing so, in fact.
No, totally. And I'm just saying, I mean, the problem is not simple at all, because every country has their own laws and they keep changing as well. So, having that kind of insurance from a company who's on it, and you just have to kind of integrate those APIs and, use their solution is pretty cool. I am super, I mean, we've spoken about KID. We've been looking at you folks for a while, so really impressed. On that note, I think more power to you, Jeff. I think KID is one company. It's on my radar. We're working closely. Nothing but wishing you folks all the best there. I know we're coming toward the end here. It's always good to see you. Thanks for your time today. It's been a lovely conversation, and we hope to, by the way, invite you again to talk to you about how's year one been at KID. Hopefully, soon.
Yeah, thanks for the invite to this. I love hanging out with you all. And I'd come back anytime. So this is fun.
Cheers. Thank you.